Hey there, you're watching Dirt Bike Channel. I'm your host Kyle Brotherson, and today we're doing the full review of this 2019 Husqvarna TE300i. Stick around. Hey, just real quick, if you're watching this video before April 30th, you still have a chance to win this dirt bike. I am giving this sucker away. Go to dirtbikechannel.com right now and get entered to win this bike. But you have to do it before the end of April 30th. These full review videos tend to be pretty long because I like to be pretty comprehensive in the things that I'm covering on this. But for you guys that say it's too long and I'm not going to watch the entire video, let me give you a synopsis here. There's a lot to like on these bikes. There's a lot more to like than there is to dislike. Are they perfect? No. Are they very, very good? Yes. Is this bike a little bit slow to warm up? Yeah, they're a little bit cold-blooded. Do they have maybe a teeny bit less bottom end because they run very, very lean? Yeah, that's probably true too. But overall, these bikes run phenomenal. I've had like, I don't know, 6 of them, of the TPI bikes, and they've all run very, very well. They don't all run the same. This one actually runs a little bit better than the KTM that I have sitting right outside my shop. So not every TPI bike runs amazing all the time. Some of them run better than others. So they're not perfect. We also need KTM and Husqvarna to be able to allow us to tune these things, and when that happens, it'll be even better. So, without further ado, let's get in and let's just start talking about the things on this bike that I really liked, and then we'll follow it up with some of the things that I didn't like. In fact, I'll probably just sprinkle them in as I go forward through the bike. I'm going to start at the front wheel and just go through the bike. These Huskies are going to come stock with a Dunlop AT81 front tire, which is an okay tire, has pretty good performance, but it doesn't last super long. I ended up switching this out with the Shinko 546 tire because I needed to compare it to another bike, and I wanted to compare the exact same tires. They come with the DID Dirt Star front wheels and rear wheels, and these are a pretty good rim. I've got no problem with these. I ended up switching this over to tubeless because that's the kind of guy that I am. So there's nothing wrong with the front wheel package. It's totally fine. The brakes are Magura brakes. On these Husky bikes, they use a Magura brake. So you've got a Magura caliper down here and a Magura brake lever up here and master cylinder. And they work really, really well. I don't think it gives you quite as much power as what the Brembo brakes do, but it's a very, very good brake. As far as if I was rating this, I would say it's probably the second best brake that I have used. It's just a little bit squishy to me. Sometimes I feel like I almost need to use 2 fingers on the brake, and I like to only have 1 finger. So sometimes I feel like I don't have quite enough power on the brake, but it's very, very good. These bikes come stock with the Explorer 48 fork, and I think it's a very good fork for a lot of people. It absorbs the chop, it absorbs the bumps. It's not valved super well to go slamming hard into whoops because you can bottom it out pretty quickly. Even with this, we did a Creft Moto revalve with a revalve control on this bike, and so this bike is dialed and amazing and awesome now, but it came actually really quite good with the Explorer 48 fork. I don't have any major complaints on that because it's easy to service, it's an easy fork to tune. Doesn't do anything bad, so the Explorer 48 fork is definitely a good quality fork for these front ends by WP. It's nice that these bikes also come with a headlight so you can extend some of those rides later into the dark. So I like that. They do also come with handguards, as you can see. The handguards are flag style handguards. They're not super strong, so they do offer a little bit of protection from your levers, but it's not like a ton of protection. There are some aftermarket handguards that are probably better, but these actually are serviceable, and I use these until I break them off. And sometimes I never do break them off because they do bend and they do flex a little bit, so they offer some definite protection for your hands, and they offer a little bit of protection for your levers as well. A few years ago, KTM and Husqvarna redesigned how the radiators bolt up to the side and how these radiator flares attach. And so they actually have this design, so I don't think it's that crucial anymore to have radiator guards. These radiator guards that come on the bike are a lot stiffer than they used to be, and they do the job pretty well. And I just think that this design is good enough that you probably don't need an aftermarket radiator guard. So that's a really good thing. The Huskies tend to be a little bit more money than the KTMs, and that's partly because they'll give you a couple upgraded parts. These triple clamps these are billet aluminum triple clamps that are really, really nice. And this is one of the things that you're paying a little bit more, because a lot of the KTMs have just like a forged aluminum. Like if you got a KTM 300XCW, this would just be a forged aluminum part right here, whereas this is billet on the Husky. So that's one of the things that you're getting for a little bit of extra money, is just some upgraded parts right there. Another thing that you get for paying a little bit extra money for the Husky is you get a skid plate from the factory. So they do give you a skid plate here, which is a plastic skid plate, bolts on really nicely, but the problem is it doesn't come down here and cover the linkage. And you'll notice I've smashed this linkage on a rock or a log right here. So what you really are gonna need is a skid plate or some type of a linkage guard that comes back down over the linkage right here to protect this all the way. The pipes that they put on the bikes are actually pretty good, and I don't feel like you're getting enough bang for the buck by putting an aftermarket pipe on the bike because I just don't think it adds a ton of performance. So I leave these pipes on because they're very, very good until I bend that up really a lot. And this one, we haven't bent it up very much, so I'm pretty happy about that since this is the sweepstakes bike. So that's good. I've got no complaints with that. I do have some complaints though with the silencer. As you can see back here, the silencer, this is not a Forest Service approved spark arrested silencer. So in order for you to ride this bike, I don't have one sitting here, in order for you to take this bike legally up into the forest and in the mountains, you're gonna have to put a spark arrestor on it. So that's not ideal. I think that this bike, even though they say, oh, it's a closed course race bike, let's just put a spark arrestor on this so that we don't have to do that in the aftermarket. As we keep moving back here, we notice that the Husky has linkage right here. So this is an advantage for some people. Other people think it's a disadvantage because this is a bike that's going to be crawling over logs and rocks and things like that. So it does have the linkage hanging down. But the cool thing about that is with Husky, you do get the linkage here. And there's a lot of people that really, really like the feel and the tunability of a bike that has linkage like this. So it's kind of cool that you've got the linkage in the Husky line, in the TE line, and you've got the PDS in the KTM line. So you can kind of pick your poison. On these TE300s, you're gonna have a linkage down here, which is pretty cool for a lot of those riders. Back here, we've got Magura brakes. So I don't have any problem with the Magura brake on the rear. I did put an oversized brake pedal up on this bike because Husky and KTMs they have kind of a really small little brake pedal. And so I went with an oversized brake pedal here. I think it was from Enduro Engineering. And I like that. But the Magura foot brake and the rear brake works totally fine for me. I've got zero problems with it. I have just enough feel with that to make it work. And that is totally fine with me. Not that this is something that other bikes don't have, but they do make it really easy to adjust the chain tension back here with your chain blocks. So they've got this set up really nice. A lot of bikes do that, but this is just something that I'm pretty comfortable with in order to, adjust my chain tension and things of that nature. The Husky bikes have a composite subframe. That's this part that comes back, this whole part of the back of the bike here, the subframe is composite. And I think that's one of the reasons that this bike ends up being about 7 to 10 pounds heavier than its KTM counterpart. But there is a good handle right here for lifting on and off stands and for shifting your back tire around on the trail. So that's nice that they have this. I wish some of the other bikes had that. Then one thing I'm not super excited about is how this side piece comes off. It's the entire side piece. I'd like to see a smaller cover here for the Airbox. Looks like I need to clean that filter out from the last ride before this bike is given away. But I'm not a super fan of how this whole thing comes off. So I mean, you get better at it. That is, see, that's not even there. It's just too big of a piece, I feel like, because this one isn't in. See, this is part of an issue. And you'd be like, well, Kyle, if you weren't a moron. Okay, there, now we've got it. And snapped in, are all the snaps in? Yes, I just think that could be a lot easier if it wasn't this big, massive piece. As you're probably aware, these TPI bikes are oil and fuel injected. So this is where you put your oil, and you can just kind of put your bottles right down in here. There's an oil reservoir on there that lasts you somewhere, I don't know how many tanks of gas, maybe 5 tanks of gas. I've never actually tried to put it to the test. I just look down on the reservoir and see if I've got plenty of fuel or plenty of oil in there, and then I'll top that off every couple of rides is kind of what I do. Just kind of peel back my my bar pad here. These Huskies come with a pretty decent trail computer here, which tells you your speed, counts your hours, and it counts your distance. It's got a trip meter on that. And I really think that's a good feature. That way I don't have to install an hour meter, and it's good enough that, you know, you can count your trips on that thing. So I like that. These Huskies will typically also have a map switch, which lets you select from really good running bike to really crappy running bike. I seriously have never wanted to run on the super crappy setting. It's supposed to be for better traction or whatever, but I put this bike together actually, and I didn't even wire up the map switch because I honestly think it's a waste, because all the map switches that I've seen on these Huskies before, like I said, there's one good map switch that makes the bike scream, and then there's one crappy map switch or map setting that makes the bike run like garbage. These TE300i's have a 6-speed transmission that has actually got some pretty interesting spacing between the gears, and this is one of the things that sets it apart from a lot of the other bikes out there. Is first gear is actually quite low, second gear is kind of right, is just above that, and then third gear, there's a big gap between second and third gear to get up into the higher gear, so it's a wider ratio transmission. So first gear is really low, second gear is also pretty low, and then third gear, you kind of catch up to some of the other bikes, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. So it's got an interesting transmission that a lot of people really, really like. It's got about a 2.5 gallon tank here, so you can actually do a pretty decent range on these bikes. The EFI portion of this bike makes it a little bit more fuel efficient, but not drastically more fuel efficient. I think part of the reason why it's more fuel efficient is it's not just dumping stuff out the overflow. And the other thing is when you lay the bike down on the ground, say you're in a situation where you don't have a place that you can use the kickstand, which happens to me all the time, and when you lay the bike over, you don't have to reach down and shut your fuel off because it doesn't leak when you tip it over. So I like that. These bikes come with ODI lock-on grips that actually just lock on to the bar right down here with the Torx on this side, and then on the throttle side it's actually part of your throttle assembly. So these are really easy to take on and off. I installed some aftermarket bar ends on this one that I like to run just to kind of save the grips, make them last a little bit longer. But I do like the ODI slip-on grips that lock on here to the bar. That's a nice touch. As you can see, the bike comes with Pro Taper grips on here. This is a little bit higher of a rise for me, so it takes a little bit of getting used to. But a lot of people really do like these Pro Taper bars because they've got just maybe the right amount of flex and feel. So that's a nice thing. I don't know how well you can see this, but you can actually move the bars forward in the triple clamps right here. So this is an empty hole right there, and I've moved the bars forward, and that helps the bike to feel a little bit more roomy to me. And some of the bikes have that, some of them don't. I'm glad that these triple clamps give you that option. We talked about the headlight. This Husky actually comes with a tail light. So this isn't a brake light, but you'll be able to see when it comes on. As you notice, the lights will stay on for a little bit after you shut off the bike, and then it'll shut off right now. Something to note, the way that KTM and Husky designs these swing arms is there's a tab right here, and there's another tab right here that holds this chain guide onto the bike, and it's just built right here into the frame. I've gotten to the point where I'm starting to run these tab protectors here. You can get them from Bulletproof Designs, you can get them from Enduro Engineering, I think, and KTM and Husky also has a power part for that. I'm starting to run these on all of my bikes now just because these are easy to tear off if you're going in some really nasty rocky terrain. These tabs, you can damage those tabs, and that's not a good thing. So you might want to put one of these aftermarket guards on there. Same thing on the other side. I almost always use a rear disc guard. I didn't on this bike because I wasn't going to be riding it that often, and I just needed to save a little bit of money, but a rear disc guard over on the other side is also very, very good protection for these things. Here's one aspect of the Husky that's super annoying to me. Notice your clicker here for high speed and low speed on the shock. You can't actually get in here and adjust this unless you take this plastic off. So you've got to remove this bolt and then pull the plastic off just to get to this high speed and low speed. You can kind of do it a little bit if you get in here, because it's a brass screw. If you pull this all the way over, you can kind of get a screwdriver in here to do your low speed clicker, but your high speed clicker, which is a 17 millimeter nut here, that's nearly impossible to really do and count your turns unless you pull this off. All they had to do is put a cutaway right here so you can get in and to use that. That's a whiff, and it bugs me so bad. On all the carbureted bikes, people will play with these auxiliary springs here, and they'll put different springs in for, you know, to have the power valve come fully open at a different RPM. On the TPI bikes, they don't want you playing with that, so just something to keep in mind. Don't play with this. The bikes run phenomenal the way that they're set, and I just wouldn't mess with that. So now we've kind of gone front to back. We've talked about some of the main features on the bike. What's it like living with the bike? Because I've been living with these TPI bikes now for quite a while. This one I've owned for, well, it's been 6 months that I've owned it, and I've got another one out there that just happens to be the orange color, which we won't talk about too much right now. But what is it like living with these TPI bikes? Here's the thing. This bike actually runs a little better than the orange bike out there. This bike has a smoothness to it that the orange one just doesn't, just the way the motor runs. And I've noticed every motor runs a little bit different. That's the same thing with the carbureted bikes as well as these TPI bikes. They don't all run the same. Generally speaking, these TPI bikes run as good or better as any carburetor I've ever been around, but that's not always the case. These bikes are very slow to warm up. They're very cold-blooded, and I think it's because they run so lean as far as fuel to oil mixture and fuel to air mixture when they are starting out. And I think KTM does that because this bike is here to pass emission standards in Europe. That's why we have these bikes. It's not because we were clamoring for fuel injected bikes, it's because of emission standards. So in order for them to get the emissions down as far as they can, this bike has to run super lean, especially in the low RPMs. And that means, especially when it's warming up, it takes a long time for it to warm up. And there are times where you will have to hit the starter and it will start and run for a few seconds and then it'll die. And then you'll have to hit the starter again. This time it probably won't do that because I think it was warm outside. Let's see. Of course, so it won't show you when I want to show you, but when the bike is cold, sometimes these things don't really want to start that well. And there have been times, if it's super cold, that you have to pull the Kickstarter out. Now, I am super glad that they have a Kickstarter, and please, KTM and Husky, do not take the Kickstarters from us. That is so terrible. But these things are not perfect. They run like a screaming eagle. And another thing to mention about it is these TPI bikes run so crisp and so clean, it kind of makes the 300 feel a little bit more like the 250. If I'm dead honest, I think, because I've had the 250 version of this and I've had the 300 version of this and I've had it on the KTM side too, 250 and the 300, I almost feel like the 250 runs a little better and it's a little better suited than the 300 is. I'm not taking anything away from this, I'm just saying that I think that these feel more like a 250 to me because some of that bottom end is kind of gone. I still think this is a fantastic bike for the tricky, nasty stuff because I've been taking this one and my KTM 300 on the nasty stuff. But some of that bottom end is just kind of lost in the weeds because of the EFI. Now, I'm hoping that KTM or Husqvarna, in this case Husqvarna, will give us the ability to tune these bikes and select some actual usable map switches that aren't just the garbage ones that come on these bikes like on and off. So that's what it's like to live with these things. These things, if you haven't ridden one of these things, and here's the thing, these fuel injected bikes are going to save 2 strokes. They're going to save 2 strokes because they won't go away because of emissions. And also, there's a bunch of you out there that have not experienced a truly tuned 2-stroke carburetor. And so if you've never had a 2-stroke that was tuned properly, this bike is going to rock your world. Because now you're going to be on a bike that runs nearly perfect. I'm not saying it runs perfect, but they'll run, most of the time they'll run nearly perfect. And so that's going to explode your brain. It has sometimes for me because I'm like, look, I don't have to tune this bike at all and it runs near perfect. Not perfect, but it is near perfect. And so that's why it's going to save 2 strokes, is because the emission thing is people are not going to, we're still going to be able to buy them. And number 2, so many people are going to be like, oh, This is what I've been missing on a two-stroke. This is a properly tuned two-stroke. In the same way that the fuel injection, you know, kind of opened the eyes of a lot of people on four-strokes, it's doing the same thing here. So overall, this is a killer bike. Any of you that buy this bike are probably going to fall in love with it immediately. If you are outside of the weight range for this bike, meaning if you're outside of the 150 to 180 range, you're probably going to need to get the bike resprung for your weight so that it has the proper amount of sag and the forks and the shock can hold you up properly. So keep that in mind. But there's just not a ton to gripe on. Yeah, I don't like the fact that it's cold-blooded. Yeah, I don't love the Maguro front brake as much as I love the Brembo brakes. But overall, this sucker is very good. I did have a problem with the brakes on this guy at the beginning. I had to replace the brakes completely because the front brake and the rear brake, I think it was the rear brake too, they would not grab at all. There was something wrong with the brake pads from the beginning. I'm not gonna fault Husky for that because they were a Brembo pad actually, and I think they just got some oil on them or something and they would never clean out, so I had to replace the brakes. So anyway, every once in a while you will have something that you have to do on a bike like that. This is a fantastic bike and I'm super excited that this is one of the bikes that we gave away. You're probably watching this after the giveaway, but just in case you aren't, this is one of the giveaway bikes that we did this year. So pretty stinking sweet bike, and if you have one or if you're on the fence, dude, climb off the fence. These things are pretty sweet. I don't think it'll let you down. If you like these videos, please remember to subscribe to the channel. You can support us by going to Patreon and setting a monthly tip amount. You can also use the links down in the description. That helps me a ton if you use those links down in the description to buy your parts or even for your Amazon shopping. That would help me out a ton. Okay, we'll see you in the next video, guys.